Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're diving into something incredibly heavy but absolutely crucial to understand. We're looking at one of the most profound firsthand accounts of survival, trauma, and the real psychological toll of the Holocaust. We'll be examining the final chapters of a survivor's time at Buchenwald. We're going straight to the source text, looking at the days right before liberation, not just as a timeline of historical events, but through the deeply reflective, retrospective lens of the survivor himself. We're going to unpack the terrifying transformation of a young man and his father and discover what truly happens to the human soul when it's pushed to the absolute brink. I knew that I was no longer arguing with him, but with death itself. Just think about that for a second. When the prisoners arrive at Buchenwald, the battle isn't just about weathering the freezing snow or holding out for a hot shower. It's this grueling, internal war against death. And the tragedy here? His exhausted father has already, deep down, started to surrender to it. The physical environment is horrific, for sure, but the real catastrophe is that internal surrender. Section 1. The Reversal of Roles. So picture this. They've just arrived at Buchenwald. They've already survived unimaginable horrors. But this is the breaking point. The narrator's father just hits his physical and mental wall. He literally collapses in the freezing snow right next to these human shapes, corpses, sticking out of the drifts. He begs his son, "Leave me. Have pity on me. I'll wait here." It's a devastating shift, right? The father, once the strong protector, suddenly becomes childlike, frightened, vulnerable, completely dependent. And the son? He's forced to step into a role he is in no way prepared for. What we see next is a terrifying contrast. On one hand, you have the son literally howling into the cold wind to wake his father up, fighting like a wild beast at the cauldron just to snatch a single cup of hot coffee. On the other hand, you have the father, creeping further and further into surrender. He offers his son the gratitude of a wounded animal. It's this frantic, exhausting effort by a kid trying to artificially pump life into a father whose own will to survive is just fading into the snow. Section 2. The Agony of Choice. Now we run into some truly chilling advice from the block leader. He looks at the narrator and says, "In this place, it is every man for himself. Stop giving your ration of bread and soup to your old father." He even tells him that in a concentration camp, there's no such thing as a father, a brother, or a friend. And, this isn't just random cruelty. It's the horrific, calculated logic of the camp system. The environment was designed to actively and systematically strip away every human tie, forcing inmates to look at their own flesh and blood as a liability to their own survival. So outwardly, the son keeps up the care. He's giving up his soup. He's fetching water. Even the water is practically poison for his father's dysentery. But beneath the surface, these dark, shameful, intrusive thoughts start taking hold. He admits, to himself and to us, that he's sharing grudgingly. At one point, when he loses his father during an alert, this terrifying thought creeps in. If only I didn't find him. If only I were relieved of this responsibility. Imagine the profound psychological trauma of that, having to acknowledge that your own father's death would actually increase your chances of living. Section 3. The Burden of Guilt. The text paints an incredibly agonizing picture of the father's final days. He's prostrate, suffering terribly from dysentery. But honestly, what's worse than the disease is the cruelty from the other inmates. Because the father's too weak to drag himself outside, his neighbors mock him, they steal his bread, they beat him violently. The narrator finds his own father crying like a child, and he tries to help, he really does. He hurls insults at the attackers, promises them his own soup, but he's completely helpless to stop the torture. He describes every single blow his father takes as one more stab to his own heart, one less reason to live. Then we hit January 28th, 1945. The father is begging for water. His insides are literally burning. An SS officer demands silence, but the father is delirious and he just keeps calling out his son's name. So the officer takes his club and deals a violent, fatal blow to the father's head. And the narrator, this is the hardest part, he admits he didn't move. He was completely paralyzed by the fear of getting a blow to his own head. So he stays silent in his bunk above. He watches his father's broken face, and he does absolutely nothing. His last word had been my name. He had called out to me, and I had not answered. The father dies alone in the dark, and they take his body away before dawn. No prayers, no candles, just this haunting, heavy silence. The survivor doesn't just have to live with the loss of his father. He has to live with the paralyzing realization that in his dad's absolute final moment of need, fear kept him quiet. The morning after brings this horrifying emptiness. The narrator realizes he can't even weep. He's literally out of tears. But the deepest trauma here is his brutal honesty as he looks back at his own conscience. Buried way down beneath all that grief, he identifies this secret, devastating feeling: free at last. The fact that his body survived meant his spirit had totally fractured. The fact that he couldn't cry was completely overshadowed by the crushing guilt of actually feeling relieved that the burden was finally gone. Section 4. A Hollow Liberation. After that, the wheels of history start spinning fast. April 5th, the SS announced they're liquidating the camp. Over the next few days, thousands are marched out. By April 10th, a sudden alert delays the final evacuation. Then, the morning of April 11th, the camp resistance suddenly rises up and takes arms. By 6 o'clock that evening, an American tank rolls up to the gates of Buchenwald. Just like that, historically, physically, the nightmare of the camp is over. But here's the thing. The reality of liberation, it's completely devoid of joy or triumph or even a desire for justice. The text is so blunt about this. Our first act as free men was to throw ourselves onto the provisions. That's it. There were no thoughts of parents, no thoughts of revenge. The starvation and trauma had reduced these people to a raw, primitive, animalistic obsession with bread. The camp system had so thoroughly stripped away their humanity that survival meant absolutely nothing more than feeding the body. Section 5, the survivor's reflection. Now, I want you to imagine the adult survivor looking back at himself just a few days after liberation. He's hovering between life and death in a hospital bed from food poisoning, and he finally gathers enough strength to stand up and look into a mirror for the very first time since he was in the ghetto. We really need to sit with the weight of this moment. It's an adult survivor reflecting on the exact instant he came face to face with what he had become. From the depths of the mirror, a corpse was contemplating me. It's such a jarring, tragic disconnect. The survivor's standing right there, breathing, physically free. But the reflection staring back, it's lifeless. The boy who loved his father, the boy who had faith, the boy with a whole future ahead of him, that boy died back in Buchenwald. All that's left is the physical shell. The look in his eyes as he gazed at me has never left me. The physical liberation of the camp might have been instantaneous, but the psychological imprisonment, that gaze of the corpse in the mirror, is a burden he carries for a lifetime. The trauma, the absolute loss of innocence, and the immense guilt of survival, they permanently etch themselves into his soul. We so often think of survival as a triumph, right? A victory of life over death. But this narrative forces us to ask a much harder question. When liberation only saves the physical body, what actually remains of the human soul left behind in the ashes? Take a moment to really absorb that. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to carry this reflection with you today.